Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Alright, so we finally got to chapter 5, continuing through our series here. It's been a while, so let's do a little review really quick. Ecclesiastes is written by whom?
Solomon.
Solomon, alright. And what are some of the main words or phrases you'll see in there, Locke?
Vanity, vanity, always vanity.
Alright, and vanity means what?
Nothingness.
Nothing. It's pointless. Alright, and yes, Grace.
Vexation of spirit.
Meaning?
Trying to catch the wind.
Yeah, it's like the picture is trying to catch a wind. It's very vexing. And?
Under the sun.
Under the sun, which is representative of what perspective?
Under the sun. Oh, the human perspective.
The human perspective. Under the sun. Yes, it's representative of the human perspective. Over the sun is obviously looking at things through a biblical perspective. So anyway, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We're going to read verse 1 through 7. And today we're going to look at vain worship. All right, vanity meaning empty or pointless. Vain worship being empty worship or pointless worship. All right, so Solomon's moving along here in the book, and he's not looking at the worship he sees people do, and he sees that it is also vanity. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that, it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God." All right, so we're going to talk about vain worship. But first, let me ask you this. What does it mean to worship? Grace.
To exalt or adore something.
To exalt or adore something. I would say like to lift high and magnify, but you're not wrong there as well. All right. Does anybody else have an idea what does it mean to worship? Locke?
Be reverent and respectful.
Reverent and respectful. That's very good. So lift high and magnify, but it's not only those things, all right, but it also means that you have to humble oneself, humble yourself. All right, so let me ask you this. Is it possible to magnify God and not humble yourself?
No.
That's correct. It is not possible to magnify God and not humble yourself. All right, here's your first verse. James chapter 4, verse 6.
But he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisted the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble.
Yes, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Matthew 23, verse 12.
"And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted."
Very good. All right, so it is not possible to magnify God and not humble yourself at the same time. Okay? But let me ask you this. Does that stop people from trying?
No.
No, it doesn't. All right? Who in the Bible we know tries to magnify God or goes through the acts of worship, but they do not humble themselves? Gage.
Saul.
All right? I'm thinking more, what was Saul? That's a better question.
He was king.
Oh, wrong Saul. New Testament Saul. What was New Testament Saul?
A tent maker.
Okay. Micah.
Pharisee.
A Pharisee. Very good. All right, so. He's just going everywhere wrong.
But you were.
Welcome back, Gage. Welcome back. You weren't wrong, but you weren't right either. All right, so. That happens sometimes. Here's the next one. Mark chapter 7, verse 6.
He answered and said unto them, Well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me in their lips, but their heart is far from me.
All right, so Jesus specifically quoting Isaiah to describe the Pharisees as, you hypocrites, they come, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. All right, that's the epitome of vain worship. Empty, pointless worship is merely just going through the acts of worshiping God, but your heart is actually far from it. You don't want to magnify God. If anything else, you want to magnify yourself. All right, and we're going to see that's where vain worship really comes to be. It's in magnifying oneself instead of magnifying God. All right, so first let's talk about watching your step, or watch your step. All right? That's your first point there. In verse 1 it says, keep thy foot when thou goest into the house of God. That phrase, keep thy foot, it has the idea of watching your step. All right? Keep thy foot, watch your step. All right. The worship of God is the highest ministry of the church. All right? It must come from a devoted heart to God. All right? So the question is, all right, everyone up here, you guys get that? What's the highest, ministry of the church?
Worshiping God.
The worship of God. Okay? You guys understand that? The question is, we just talked about worship means to lift high, to magnify God, to adore, reverence. You guys all said those things. So the question then is, why do you come to church? All right, just think about that personally. Why do I come to church? Do I come to church because I want to worship God, or do I want to come for other reasons? All right, and I'm not saying you're a wicked, awful person, all right, if it's not to worship God. All right, we all fail, we all get preoccupied with other things. All right, but is that always your heart when you come to church? Hey, I'm coming to Lighthouse Baptist Church today to lift high and magnify my Savior. All right? If we're being honest, we can all say that's not always true of us. All right? Maybe that's something you never really thought about before. Like you just here's where not just young people, but even adults as well who come to church, here's where they kind of get off on the wrong spot here. They're not watching their step. They think merely coming to church or attending church equals worshiping God. You guys follow me there? Mm-hmm. Oh, I came to church, I sat down, I mouthed the words to the song because I'm really embarrassed to sing in front of people. All right, and then I kind of sat and I looked at Pastor while he was talking, and it was kind of like Charlie Brown's teacher the whole time, All right, don't go and tell Pastor that's how I said his preaching is. I'm giving an illustration. All right, yeah, don't do that. But they think merely the act of attending church equates to worshiping God. How many of you guys think that's true? How many of you guys believe that's false, completely false? Merely coming to church is not equating to worshiping God. So let me ask you this. What would be other reasons for why you would want to come to church? And understand this, not all of these reasons are bad. All right? So let me hear some. What over here, ladies, besides Grace, what are some reasons you would come to church?
Fellowship with other people.
Fellowship with other people. My friends are here. A lot of you guys are homeschooled. I'm not saying homeschoolers don't have friends, all right? But a lot of your friends are here at church. So it's like, yeah, I can't wait to see Alana and Amethyst or something like that. And, I can't wait to see, I guess Locke and Gage and stuff. But is that a bad thing?
No.
But should that be your sole reason for coming to church?
No.
All right, so why else would people come to church? Locke.
Just to look good.
To look good. Wow, Locke. He's like, man, I got my new suit and stuff, Well, your brother was wearing the spiffy suits and, the snowman suit and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I see where he gets it from. He gets it from his older brother. He wants to look good. You know what? I know where you're going at, but honestly, that secondary reason that I'm joking around about, that could also be a reason people come to church too. Oh, I just got a new bag. I want everyone to see my new bag I just got. Or, oh man, I just got this nice tailored suit. I'm going to look good, a new watch. Very sad reason to come to church. But what Locke, I am sure, was hitting upon was just the mere act of coming to church makes people feel like I'm a good person. All right? I mean, what's the defense? Put your hands down real quick. When you guys grow up and you're into workforce and so forth, and you're working with other people who may not be Christians and stuff, and maybe a conversation comes up about morality and, what makes you a good person, inevitably you will hear somebody say something like this. Oh yeah, I'm a good person. I go to church. But you had no idea they were a Christian because they never lived like that any day when you were with them at work. All right? But they equate the simple act of going to church to be, oh, that's what good people do. So sometimes people go to church just because, hey, I want to look good. I want everyone to think I'm a good person. All right? But they really only come like on Christmas and Easter. Let me ask one more. What's another reason you might go to church? Ethan.
Potlucks.
Hey. Oh, wow.
Amen.
That is true. Oh, church is having an event? It's like church is having an event? Oh, Miss So-and-so is going to make the what? And then they're like, all right, I'll be there. They're only coming to eat. And then, you know what? They don't even go into service. They just kind of hang around the back because they want to survey all the food on the line. And they're just like, oh, I'm just making sure the flies don't get on it or something. And yeah.
I used to go.
All right, so
because I got candy.
obviously there's a lot of reasons you go to church, but the utmost reason we should go to church is to worship God. All right? And the serious question, and it is a serious question, you have to ask yourself, is that why I'm coming to church? Am I actually coming to worship God? Whether it's through teen class, whether it's through the main service itself, whether it's through how I'm singing. Guys, singing is a way that we worship God as well. Am I singing to lift high and magnify God, or am I singing so that the people around me can hear my angelic voice and be like, ooh. So here's the problem with vain worship. When you're not coming to worship God, you're going to magnify yourself. Number one, you rob God of the reverence and honor that's due to him alone. When you're coming to church for your own reasons, all right, you're robbing God of the reverence and honor that he deserves. But not only that, you grow to be an insincere and hypocritical Christian. Okay? Insincere meaning, oh, I don't really care about magnifying God. It's all about myself. All right? And you become hypocritical because obviously you're not growing as you should as a Christian, and people are going to eventually see through that fake, exterior you put up, that facade of, oh yeah, I'm a good Christian, and they're going to see immediately, no, you're not. Because if you're not coming to worship God, you're not going to grow as a Christian as well. All right, next, let's talk about foolish sacrifice. All right, verse 1, it goes on, it says, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. All right, we don't offer sacrifices today. Why is that? When it comes to like biblical sacrifices, what you see here, why don't we offer those sacrifices today? Luke.
Because Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice.
Jesus Christ was the perfect sacrifice in the cross. We're not going to turn there, but I think in your note takers, I have Hebrews chapter 10. You guys want to read that? It explains greatly why we don't offer sacrifices today. But there are different types of sacrifices we offer today. All right, I think I have the references all down in your notes. We're not going to take the time to read all those. But some of the different sacrifices we have are, all right, we have the sacrifice of our bodies. All right, not meaning that you're like killing yourself. No, it's a living sacrifice. Romans 12, 1 through 2. Many guys have memorized that verse. Present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. All right, we can offer our witness to God as well. All right, our gain. God has blessed us in many ways, and it's and offering the tithe and giving of what we've gained from Christ as well is a great way that we can sacrifice. We can offer our praise and good works, and we can offer our prayers of faith as well. All right, so I'll leave that up there for a second here. All right, so we don't sacrifice like they did in the Bible times, but we do sacrifice in different ways today. All right, but what's the sacrifice of fools? Or what makes those sacrifices foolish? Okay, so let's think about that for a quick second. All right, so what makes a sacrifice foolish? Any ideas? Grace?
When you do it just because somebody tells you to, not because you really believe you're doing it.
That's one, right? That's one way you can have a foolish sacrifice. Ethan?
The thoughts behind it.
Well, let's put the intents of your heart behind, like the heart behind it. Oh, I know I'm supposed to be nice and open the door for the old lady that's coming into the church or something like that. But if your thoughts are like, oh, Susie's looking at me, I want her to see how great of a Christian I am, and you go and run, and Conrad's going to open the door in front of you, like, Conrad, get out of the way, I need to see. Your heart has to be correct in your sacrifice as well. Conrad, what you got?
Just for curiosity, kinda. Like, just to see what happens.
Just to see what happens? Yeah. And overall, just curiosity. Now, Gage was not far off when he was talking about this at the beginning, all right? But Saul, King Saul, Old Testament Saul, which you're getting at, he's a great example of a foolish sacrifice. Gage, what were you going to talk about?
I was going to talk about how he, instead of killing all of the animals, he decided to sacrifice the good ones instead.
Mm-hmm. And what happened?
One of the prophets came over and said it is better to abandon the sacrifice.
Yes, exactly. Turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 15. We're going to read verse 22. So 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. Solomon does this. He's trying to make up for it, and tell Samuel, hey, I'm sorry. I'll give more sacrifices. And Samuel tells him this in verse 22. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. So, saying sacrifice is not a substitute for obedience. All right? You can do all these religious acts, but if you do not have the correct heart behind it in obeying God, they are vain. All right? they're worthless. It's like the Pharisees we talked about earlier. Your lips profess that I am Lord, but your heart is far from me. All right? That's a foolish sacrifice when you're merely doing it for yourself. So another way to put it, a sacrifice is foolish when it does not have the goal of magnifying God, but to exalt one's self. King Saul, was all about himself. He didn't start that way, but he got to that point, all right, and it cost him dearly. It cost him his kingdom, all right? And it's very easy for Christians to become that way as well, whether it be in subtle ways or small ways, but eventually it will grow bigger, all right, because it's just about me. And you may not think about it, and sometimes it's hard to realize it because you're thinking, oh, well, I'm doing good things. I'm worshiping God. I'm doing these things in the church. This is a religious thing that I'm a part of. All right, but sometimes you got to take a step back and examine, am I really doing this because I love God and I want to magnify him? Or is it because I want my parents to think I'm a good kid? Or if it's because, I want to get this gift for Christmas and I want my parents to think I've been good or something. All sorts of weird reasons. And it changes the older you get, but it can still be selfish. But a sacrifice is foolish when the goal is no longer to magnify God, but to exalt one's self. All right, next, let's talk about careless prayer. All right, careless prayer. Verse 2. Let me go back to Ecclesiastes now. Chapter 5, verse 2 says, Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth. That's very important to memorize there, okay, guys? God is in heaven, thou upon the earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. We'll get to that in a second here. Prayer is serious business, okay? It's a serious thing. It's not something that you should enter into flippantly, all right? And too often, and I think we've gotten to the practice of this, especially when in praying for our food, like, Dear Lord, thank you for our food. It's very easy for Christians to get into a going through the motions when it comes to prayer, all right? You guys remember I talked to you guys, I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, about being specific in your prayers, all right? It's very easy to generalize, like, Lord, I pray you be with all the sick people. Lord, I pray you be with all the... I'm not saying that's a bad thing to pray, like people are sick, but it means more when you're being specific. Why? Because when you're being specific about what you pray, what does that show you're doing? Locke?
You're being thoughtful.
You're being thoughtful. All right? Now, he talks about in these verses, hey, don't be rash with thy mouth. Don't be hasty to utter anything. What does that mean? What does it mean to be rash or hasty? Grace?
To just always have something ready to say without thinking about it.
Okay, that's part of it. But what does it mean to be hasty? The idea is in haste. Locke?
Just to do it when it comes to the top of your head.
Whatever comes to the top. It's a rushed thought. All right? Young people, not to generalize all young people oftentimes get caught in this type of thing where your parents confront you about something and you're trying to think of a good excuse, all right, because you don't want to get in trouble, so your mind is being rash, you're being hasty, you're trying to think of the best thing, and the next thing you know, you come up with the dumbest excuse possible, like, Locke, why is this lamp broke? And you're like, oh, Grace did it. And it's like Grace has been like sleeping over at someone else's house for like the past 2 days. Like, obviously he did not think before he spoke. All right? And you can't do that with prayer. All right? Don't be hasty in your prayer. Think before you speak. I don't have that. There you go. Think before you speak. He put the thought in here. It's like, hey, don't be hasty. Don't rush. Think about it. All right? Because God, who are you speaking to? God. And he brings out the specific point that God is in heaven and you're where? Earth. All right? And that's not to... Okay, actually that is... It's that, one, magnify the difference between you two. All right? But it's also to show who is greater than the other. All right? You are speaking to the one who's not just an authority, but the authority above all. All right? You're speaking to God in heaven. Number one, he says do it soberly. All right? Don't do it... There was this trend, I don't know if this is big today, but when I was in college, when people were like, Jesus is my BFF, or something like that. Jesus is a friend that sticks closer than any brother, all right? But you need to be reverent when you speak to him. That does not mean you have to go up and be like, oh Lord, thou, like speaking in Old English like you see in the Bible or something like that. I'm not saying that, all right? But at the same time, you shouldn't be like, Jesus, yeah, like, and I remember guys that prayed like that when I was in school, and it's just like, it just felt a little off. Like, he's not your homeboy, he's not your BFF, your girlfriend, or anything like that. All right, he's God. All right, and you need to approach anytime you pray to him that I am actually praying to God. And understand this: if you change that in your mentality, it's going to change, one, how you pray, like how you speak when you pray, but two, the strength you have in your prayer. Because when you start to realize I'm speaking to God, I'm not just doing something that my parents want me to do, or I'm not just doing this thing because Christians are supposed to. I'm actually talking to God and I'm pleading to him and I'm talking to him. It gives you strength because you understand you're praying to someone who has the strength to not only hear your prayer, but answer your prayers, work in your life, guide you, direct you, and do that which is ultimately good in your life. You guys follow that? All right? And like I said, I feel like we don't always set young people up greatly to understand this because, the first time you learn to pray is to pray for food, and you're really just hungry, so you want to get to it as fast as you can. And so you end up being like, thank you for this food. Amen. Amen. But understand, prayer is a serious endeavor, and it's a great privilege that we have. So look at every time you pray as an opportunity, a privilege you have to pray and speak to Almighty God. He goes on to say, a fool is known by the multitude of his words. All right? Here's the greatest thing. When it comes to not being hasty, all right, and when it comes to not just saying a bunch of words, okay, why does somebody just speak a lot? Someone other than the Dado kids, guys. Come on. Ethan.
They want to draw the attention on themselves.
They want to draw the attention on themselves. Sometimes people speak a lot too because they're nervous and they don't know what they're supposed to say. All right, so they're just trying to cover up their insecurity or something like that. Or they want to seem like they know what they're talking about, but it doesn't take long to understand they don't. All right, this is when someone speaks more than they should, it's a great sign of immaturity. All right, I'm not saying that in a bad way. Just show the older you get, the more mature you get. Not necessarily the older you get, but the more mature you get, the more you understand when to speak and when to shut up. All right? Hey, if I don't know anything about this subject, I'm not going to pipe in and talk like I do know anything about this subject because you're going to look like a fool. Now, here's the thing I'm trying to get to. When people do that, when they speak when they shouldn't, or when they speak hastily, it shows they're not prepared. And the best thing you can do when it comes to prayer is come with a prepared heart. Write down what you're going to pray about. Think about who you're going to pray for, especially if you're praying specifically. I encourage you guys to keep like a journal or something of prayer requests. All right? One, it helps you be specific about what you're praying about. But two, it helps you keep track of how God has been working in your life and the lives of your friends. All right? And three, it gives you an opportunity to reach out and help those in need. Like, hey, Piper, so how's it been going with that thing that you asked me to pray about? Whatever it is, I've been getting along with your brothers. Are they still knuckleheads? Something like that. Whatever it may be, you guys understand how that strengthens your prayer life. It strengthens you as a Christian and strengthens the bonds you have with your brothers and sisters in Christ. All right, be prepared when you speak. All right, I was going to leave off with this for this section here. This is a quote I heard many times. I'm sure many guys have heard before. It says, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt." All right? This is a very true quote. It's not in the Bible or anything. It's just quoted by a man. But it's true. All right? So prepare yourself if you are going to speak to God. All right? So you don't come with careless prayer or as a fool. Now, does anybody know who said this quote? It's a trick question, really.
My mother?
Wow! She probably got it. Now, for the longest time, I thought this was from Mark Twain. All right, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. But apparently, when I was looking up today, people don't know if it's Mark Twain or Abraham Lincoln. Either or, it's a good quote. All right, last section really quick. Insincere vows. Insincere vows. What are vows? Anybody know? Micah.
Kind of like promises.
Like a promise you make, all right? So let's read verse 4 through 7. We'll finish it off here. It says, "When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou vows." All right, so when you vow to God, you better be ready to perform it. "Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay." All right, so, everybody hates it when someone said lies. Like they said they're going to do something and then they don't follow through. Nobody likes that. All right, so don't do that with God. Verse 6, suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error, wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands. Like, hey, don't do it. Don't vow, don't promise to do something to God, and like say if God was to come or an angel was to come, be like, hey, did you do it? I mean, how foolish would it be to be like, oh, well, I'm sorry, God, I didn't mean to say that, or I actually meant this, or I didn't think about it. Like, that's the wrong time. It's too late then to be like, oh, sorry, God, my bad. You think that works? No, it doesn't work, all right? I don't even know if it works with your mom. I don't think it works with your mom. Like, oh, my bad, Mom. My be. I'm sorry I didn't do that. No, it doesn't work. Verse 7, for in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God. All right. So number 1, be a man of your word. Okay? If you say you'll do something, then do it. Now, when it comes to worship and vows, all right, what is that equivalent of today when it comes to our worship? If we're to vow something to God, what do we usually call that, or how do we see that in our worship today? Anybody?
Wait, what did you say?
When we come to church and we worship, all right, talking about vows, like making a promise to God, how do we see that played out in our worship today? Like in what part of the service or ministry, like what do we see that happen when you're promising something to God? Ethan.
The invitation.
The invitation, and what are you doing at the invitation? All right, Chris. You're praising God. Gage.
You're
When you go to camp, all right, let me just try to make it more specific here. All right, and the preacher preaches, it touches your heart. All right, you're convicted and so forth, and they give an invitation. What are you doing at the invitation? You're going forward to do what, Luke? Respond to God and make a Micah. A confession, a decision. You're vowing to God. You're promising, Lord, I was convicted about what I've been watching on TV, and I'm promising, or I'm making a decision not to watch those things anymore. Lord, I've been struggling with what I look on my phone. Lord, I've been struggling with this, that, and you're making a decision to not do those things or to be better. Like, Lord, I'm dedicating my life to you. At camp, they always have a service about surrendering to God. All right, those are vows you're making to God. All right, so if you don't keep them, is that a good or a bad thing? It's a bad thing. All right, so if you say you're going to do something, do it. If not, you're going to be one of two things. You're either going to be a liar or you're a delayer. All right, and a delayer is what?
You kind of like forget and you're like, oh no, I totally forgot.
Put it off.
That's a forgetter. Put it off. You're putting it off like, oh, soon enough. Maybe later. Or you know what? I know I made a promise that I wasn't going to listen to this music anymore, but you got home and you're on your phone again. You're just like, all right, I'll take care of it soon enough. All right, at the start of the school year, then I'll buckle down, I'll focus on following God, and I'll get rid of it then. Don't delay, all right, because that also still just makes you a liar, all right, or a breaker of your vow. All right, here's your next verse, Proverbs 20, verse 4. So you have insincere vows, but you don't keep your vows. Let's go with Caleb. Go ahead.
The sluggard will not plow by the reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in the harvest and have nothing.
All right. You got okay. So if you guys can hear that, Ethan, Caleb, right? He said the sluggard. All right, he won't plow in the field because it's cold outside. All right, it's like, oh man, it's for reason of the cold. It's too cold. All right, but then it goes on to say, then he will beg when it comes to harvest. Why? Because he didn't tend to his field. All right, he delayed. He's like, oh, the conditions aren't right yet. It's too cold outside. And, the day before Christmas here, everyone's like, oh, it's cold, and then it has consequences, right? All right, you can't do that when you make a vow of God. You can't be like, all right, I'll start it next week, like Pastor Tim does with his diet all the time. No, I'll start it next week. I'll start it on Monday. All right, Lord, I'll follow you. Is God pleased with that? All right, you think if God was in front of you right now, all right, would you say that to him? Like, God, I'll do that tomorrow. No. All right? Understand, God's always with you. All right? So keep your vows. It's better not to vow than it is and not pay it than to vow and not pay it as well. All right. Here's another way you have insincere vows. You bribe God. You're bribing God. All right? What does that mean? What do you guys think that means to bribe God? Gage.
It's like, you do this and I do this.
Yeah, you guys do it with your parents all the time, I think, sometimes. Or you want to do it with your parents. Like, Mom, If I do this, can I get this? Or can I get 5 more minutes of on the Wii, or not the Wii, the Switch or whatever, or the Xbox? I can have a graham cracker. What are you, a parrot? Okay, so here's the thing. Don't do that with God. But a lot of people do that. Like, that's the main reason, like, a lot of people go to church. It's like, all right, life hasn't been going good. I'm going to go to church so life can be better. All right? Like God's a genie or your concierge or something like that. No. Don't go to God like, God, if I do this, then will you do this for me? All right? That's insincere vow. Matthew 4, verse 7, it says, do not tempt. This is when Christ was being tempted by Satan in the wilderness. He says, you do not tempt God. All right? You tempt God when you bribe God. It's like, God, if I do this, then will you do it? No, he's not at your beck and call. And we already talked about the camp decision, okay? And the reason they're called camp decisions, obviously you make them at camp. All right, Pastor Tim worked at camp for like almost a decade and stuff. And something that happens a lot when you see people come every summer, all right, and they make these things we call camp decisions. The reason we call them that is because at camp it's very easy to make decisions for God, all right, because you're in a great environment, you're moved from the distractions of the world, you've got good music, you got good preaching, and you're on fire, and it becomes a very emotional thing, and then you make this great decision, and when you go back home and you lose all that environment around you, it becomes so much harder to do those things, and you come back next year and you realize you're making the very same decision again, okay? Guys, I encourage you, any decision you make for Christ, any vow you make for Christ, don't make it a camp decision. Make it a sincere, committed decision. Not because you're feeling the spiritual high of everyone else around you, but because you know this is something you need to get right with God, and you promise that you will do that to grow as a Christian and glorify God each and every day of your life. To truly worship God means that you must fear him. Okay, we saw that at the end of our passage. You must fear God, meaning to reverence him, to honor him, and respect him. All right, but the question is, am I truly here to worship God or vainly worship God?